Hello and good day everyone. Are you familiar with basic Excel functions? Well, if no, here are the 10 basic Excel functions you need to know and to learn.
Today we're talking about sum ifs. So the original sum if function has range, criteria, then sum range. But the sum ifs differs by having the sum range first and then multiple criteria, so you can have different criteria that you want to, more than just one. Right? So for example, if we have this as a sum range, right, and we want to make sure that this range will be equal to food, right, but we also want to make sure that this number is greater than 2, right? So that will omit the apple, right? That's the only one of the food that doesn't satisfy that condition. So it should only be 77 plus 66 for the cherry and the eggplant, right? And then I'll do a close parenthesis and hit enter. I had a pop-up that says I had an error, so I don't want to accept it because I know that the error is that I missed this closing quotation. Alright, if I hit enter now, it should be fine. And we can look and see that 77 plus 66 is that number. So it is satisfying all of those arguments of it has to be a food and it also has to be greater than 2. Right? So it's these. You can mix and match this with a whole bunch of other ways. You can do how we did before, where you type in a specific cell for a search, and also if you want it to be greater than something else, you can always do the operator, the ampersand, and then a cell. So if we go back, we do food, we enter, and then also that it's greater than 2, we get back to our 143. What are you going to sum? How are you going to make it complicated? Today we're talking about another function called countifs. It's an expansion on the previous one where we had countif, and if we selected the range greater than 70, we would have 3. Countifs is basically an expansion on that, where it takes multiple counting and specifics and putting them together using OR functions, where they all have to be true in order to be counted. So for example, if we do countifs and we want this range to be greater than 70 again, but we also want it to be from this range of food, when we hit enter, it'll also give us 3, right? So it's these, the 77, 99, and 88, but also these as foods. So if we change, for example, this one to a fruit, it should change to 2 because it's not equal to food, it's equal to fruit. That can be used in so many other ways to narrow down and count a bunch of different ranges Today we're talking about count and count A functions. They're pretty straightforward. Count basically counts how many numbers there are, and count A is similar to count all, where it'll count everything, numbers and text. So we have this column here that has just numbers, and then I typed in XX here as just empty text. So if we go to our function, so equal count, and let's highlight this range, we should get 5 because there are 5 cells here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that have numbers in them. Whereas if we use count A, and I highlight the same range, it should return 6 because it's counting all. It's pretty straightforward, pretty easy, but it's one way to maybe verify that some data doesn't have any blank cells. So let's say if I deleted this one, the number should change. See? I'll put it back. You can use this in all sorts of ways. How do you think you will? Today we're talking about cross-sheet referencing or references. We can easily reference other sheets while within our current one, if they're within the same workbook. So for example, you have one sheet that is your main sheet, and all of your main data points are on it, and you have other sheets that are supporting that are being referenced, right? So for example, we're on, if we see down here, a copy of sheet 2, or sorry, sheet 1, and then we can click the equal sign, and if we click on sheet 1, we see up here that it is now referencing sheet 1. So if I click, for example, this cell, so it's cell D5 in sheet 1, and I hit enter, it'll take us back to the other sheet, and we now see that it's referencing that. So if this number changes, so for example 35, on sheet 2, it will change as well. So they're updated automatically because it's being referenced. We can also reference multiple sheets if we want. So if we want this from sheet 5, or sorry, sheet 2, if we want from sheet 1 that, and we want to add it from, for example, sheet 3, this number, we hit enter, and it'll do it. One thing to note is from the last time we learned about tables, tables can be referenced anywhere. So, for example, if we do equals, and we know that it's called fruit sales, I'll hit tab, and then I can reference directly, we'll do total cost, and enter, and it will automatically input all the columns because we're referencing that set of columns here. If we just want one cell, then we can just as easily do fruit sales, or even click on it, sorry, equals, we can do a whole bunch of different things with this to help make things look nicer, easier, and complex if you want it. Today we're talking about freezing panes. At the bar at the top. We're normally in the Home tab, but today we'll go to the View tab. And all the way further here, we have Freeze Panes. We can see that we can freeze panes, freeze top row, and freeze first column. So freezing it will basically keep it on screen, whether or not it's being scrolled one way or another. So we shall select freeze, and let's just first do the top row. So if you have any headers and whatnot of a list, right, you can keep this frozen, and if I scroll, we see that the number of the rows are moving, but this first row is still staying at the top. So we get a really long list, but still know what they mean, right? To undo, go back to freeze panes, and you can click unfreeze. And we see now, let's scroll just like normal. Basic concept again for the first column, where if I keep going to the right, we can see column A is stuck, and we see all the other columns are moving. Okay, we'll go back to the front. Let's unfreeze this. So the final portion is freeze panes, right? So if we select this range, for example, and then we freeze it, we'll see that it scrolls down here and up here. The way that freezing panes like this does is whatever cell is in the rightmost, or even if you just select one, that'll count it as the first movable cell. So for example, if we unfreeze and then we click this, we go back to freeze, we can see that this is the first movable cell in the bottom right? So it freezes the cell, or sorry, the row above it and the column to the left. If we undo this freeze and we click the eggplant, we assume that it'll freeze these rows and above and this row to the left. There we go. So this will help when you have bigger lists with multi-column headers or descriptors, or you even need to see what a specific one means, but you don't care about everything else being scrolled. We're talking about the and or functions. So if we dive into it, do equals and then tab, we can see, so let me go back so you can read it. We can see that the and will return true if everything within it is true, but it will return false if even one thing is wrong. And on the other hand, in or, we'll check if anything within it is true or false. So if only one thing is false, but the rest are true, it'll still return true. If anything at all is true, it'll still return true. If all are false, that's the only time it will return false. Right, so let's dive in and see over here. Let's say and we'll do 1 is less than 2, which we know for that to be true. Then we'll do for a second one, 3 is less than 4, which we also know to be true, it should return true. Right? If we change, let's say this one to be false, because 3 is not less than 2, it should return false. If we do that for an OR, right, we can do 1 is less than 2, and then 3 is less than 2. We know that the 1 is less than 2 will be true, and the 3 less than 2 will be false. So only 1 is true. It'll still give us true. If we change this one to, let's say, 0, so both of these will be false, it'll give us false. So you can use these in conjunction to find a lot of different scenarios and use cases. Along with the if, you can put them inside of each other to get different answers and look into different things. So if we, example, put if, right, and then we want and this cell to be less than this cell, and then this cell to be less than this cell, right? We know, close that. We know that this will be false and this will also be false. So this should be false. So put true here, and then false there. If I hit enter, it should give us false. If we change these around to do greater than, and this one as well to be greater than, they both should be true. And you can keep doing this with however you want. You can make it as complicated as you want or as simple as you want. We're talking about printing and turning it into a PDF. Straightforward, like other apps and programs, is if you go to File, down to Print, you'll get to a page that looks relatively like this. So we can always print it to a PDF, or you can click this and select whichever printer that you want it to print to. We have options of selecting or printing only the active worksheets, printing the entire workbook. So if you have multiple worksheets, it'll print everything. Or you print selection, which is if you highlight a specific range, it will print that. Normal options of paper size, how the paper is oriented, normal margin, and scaling, where if you don't do any scaling, it'll print how it looks on the preview like this. Otherwise, you can shrink everything to fit on one page, which might make it really tiny to read. You can fit all the columns on one page, and then you can also fit all the rows on one page. All of these options will shrink it or zoom it out depending on how your columns are set up and rows. If we go back, we have some other options up here. So for example, in page layout, you can already set the margins, orientation, paper size until, or so that you're ready for printing. Print area, you can set a print area. So if you select these cells, for example, you can set print area, and then when we go back to print, it'll only show those. See how my heading is no longer here? You can also use Control and P to get back to the print page screen. And then finally, if we go to view, we can see there's different views. So normal view is what we always would like to be in. But then page break will show us where each individual page setting is. So if we have different sections or whatever, we want to insert a page break or whatnot, it'll look like this and break it apart that way. Page layout will show us where it basically breaks off when we have too big a size, or how our pages will be printed. So for example, this page normally will be printed from columns A through I and rows 1 all the way down to 41. Everything else will be on a separate page when printed normally. We're talking about data validation, which is basically a way to make sure that specific cells are getting the appropriate data input into it, right? So for example, we have this question of how old are you? And we will want to put data into this cell right below it, right? So we will go from the tab to the data tab, and all the way to the right over here we have data validation, right? And I'll click that and it pops up this window which asks for what we're putting inside of it, right? So we can say any value, but we want to know how old this person is, right? We can do whole numbers, decimals, even a list, date, time, custom, text of a certain length, right? But for this, we'll just say whole number, because people don't be like, I'm 15 and a half, I'm 35 and 3/4, right? So we'll just say whole number for now. We'll select whole number, and we want it to be between specific ages, right? We've gone over similar stuff to all of this, so there's no need for extra explanation for that. But we'll just say a minimum of 0, because what is a person not less than 0? And a maximum, and we'll go with 100. I'm not sure if there's 101-year-olds using Excel, but I'm going to discriminate a little bit. You can always select a range as well too, if you would like to grab data or even a reference from a cell or a range of cells. For example, something that's calculated. But for now, we'll just stick with 0. Right? The input message will pop up when the cell itself is selected. So we'll just call this age, right? And the input message will be, how old are you in whole numbers, right? And then if there's an error, we can set any of these errors, but we'll set it to stop, and then we'll just call it not a valid age, and then the error message will just be, how old are you really? There we go, and I'll hit OK. Right, so if we're selecting anything else, nothing pops up. But if we select the cell that we just did the data validation for, we get this pop up. If I put 29 and I hit enter, it'll input it. But if I try to put 26.5, I hit enter, I get a pop-up, right? So we'll retry it, and then if we type in anything else like old and I hit enter, it'll still pop up with the error message. So I can hit cancel, and it'll go back to what it originally was. And with that, you can make so many different types of charts, lists, keep people accountable for what they're inputting on certain cells of value. If you're sharing even Excel workbooks and such, They were talking about SUMIF, which will basically add up numbers and such that we want with certain conditions. So if we take a look at it, SUMIF, we see that there's 3 arguments. There's range, criteria, and sum range. Right, so range, we can select this set of numbers, right, that we want to have the sum from. But if we want sums that are greater than 80, right, we'll use our conditions and we'll ignore the sum range for now, hit enter. Should be 187, right? So we can double check to make sure this is correct by doing 88 plus 99, because those are the only numbers greater than 80. Enter, and yes, it is correct. All right, the last argument that's optional is a sum range. So if we want the initial range and criteria to be for something else that's not numbers or whatnot, but we want numbers to be summed, that's where this comes into play. So for example, we'll take this column as our range, and I want everything that's equal to food to be summed, and our sum range will be the quantity, so we have an overall sum total of all the food. And if I hit enter, it should be 242. And we can double check this by just doing 7 plus 99, 77 plus 99 plus 66. And yes, it is the same. You see, it's a lot easier to do this function than doing this manually all the time. And you can even change it to, like how we've done before, reference a cell. And if say we want this cell to be referenced, right, and then within it we can type food, right, we can type drink, right, we can do whatever we would like, and it will do that. We were talking about basic charts. We're gonna just show you the very basics to get you started. I'm not gonna go super into in depth where you need like a data science degree or anything like that. It's just to show easy, simple things. So for example, we want to see the price of fruit compared to each other, right? So we'll highlight the range that we want, and then we will go to insert, and we'll go over to this chart section, right? We can click this and it should bring up recommended charts, insert, whatnot. We'll go to all, and then we can see all the different types that there's available. We'll get like a small preview. If we hover over it, it'll increase it, but a preview of what the chart will look like. So there's different types: column, line graph, a pie, bar, and so on and so forth. So you can figure out which will work best for you. For now, we'll just go with a simple column to compare them, and I'm thinking we'll go with color. Right, I'll select it, click OK, and then it'll be inserted where I can actually move around different sections. Right, I can move this around and change things. I can move this area inside. Right, and then you can move this to somewhere else on your screen and go over the data if you want. If you want to change anything up here, when you have it selected, you can go to chart design, and there will be a whole bunch of different options. Right, you can even change the colors if you want to, change the layout.